The unforgiving sun of Almarez beat down on the barren landscape, turning the golden sand into a sea of shimmering heat. Ilara clutched her twin baby brothers closer to her chest, her blue skin already beginning to dry and crack under the planet's merciless rays. At only 11 cycles old, she was now responsible for 3 lives instead of just her own. "Leave and never return, thief!" The words of her Uncle Drax still rang in her ears as she trudged forward, each step heavier than the last, all for an extra spoonful of milk, the precious blue liquid their species needed for survival, that she had taken for her fever-stricken brothers. The twins whimpered softly against her chest. Their cerulean skin was paler than it should be, almost translucent in the midday sun. Ilara tried to shield them with her body, but she knew they wouldn't last long in this heat. The small satchel of provisions her aunt had thrown at her feet would barely last a day, and the nearest settlement was at least 3 days' walk across the Crimson Desert. "It's okay," she whispered to them, though her voice cracked with fear. "We will find shelter. We will survive." But as the hours passed, Ilara's determination began to falter. Her legs trembled with each step, and her vision blurred from dehydration. The horizon wavered before her eyes, an endless sea of sand that promised nothing but a slow death. When she finally collapsed to her knees, still cradling her brothers protectively, Ilara allowed herself to weep. Tears were precious moisture wasted, but she could no longer hold them back. The babies, sensing her distress, began to cry as well, their tiny blue hands reaching up to touch her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I failed you both." It was then that she heard it, a low rumbling sound that seemed to make the very ground beneath her vibrate. At first, she thought it was another of the notorious Almaris sandstorms, but the sound was too rhythmic, too mechanical. Squinting against the harsh light, Ilara turned to see a cloud of dust approaching from the eastern dunes. As the object drew nearer, she gasped. It was like nothing she had ever seen before. A large metal vehicle with massive wheels that crushed the sand beneath them. It was bulky and weathered, patches of rust spotting its surface, but it moved with purpose, and it was heading directly toward them. Ilara tried to stand, to run, but her legs would not obey. All she could do was curl her body around her brothers and wait for whatever new danger approached. The vehicle came to a halt just 20 paces from where she knelt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss and a creak, a door swung open on its side, and a figure emerged. Ilara stared in disbelief. It was not one of her people. This creature stood taller, with skin the color of the pale Almaris moon. No blue pigment at all, just a tan that spoke of long days under alien suns. Its face was framed by dark hair, and its eyes were a startling green that reminded her of the rare moss that grew near the water springs of her home village. A human. She had heard stories of them, traders and explorers from a distant planet called Earth. Some said they were dangerous, warlike creatures. Others claimed they were curious wanderers, seeking knowledge rather than conquest. The human approached slowly, hands raised in what Ilara somehow understood to be a gesture of peace. It was a male, she realized, dressed in worn clothing, covered in pockets and straps, practical for the harsh environment. "Hello there," he called out, his voice deep but gentle. "Do you need help?" Ilara didn't understand his words, but his tone was kind. Still, she clutched her brothers tighter and tried to back away. The human stopped, seeing her fear. He crouched down to appear less threatening and pointed to himself. "Leon," he said clearly. "Leon Harris." Then he gestured to a canteen at his belt, miming drinking, and held it out to her. Water. Precious water. Ilara's throat constricted painfully at the sight, but suspicion kept her rooted in place. This could be a trick. Perhaps he wanted to capture them, to take them to one of the research facilities she had heard whispered about by the adults in her village. But then one of the twins let out a weak cry, his tiny body shuddering with the effort. The sound seemed to change something in the human's expression. His eyes widened and he moved forward more urgently, though still with caution. "Children," as he said, though Ilara couldn't understand. "You have children with you." He reached them and knelt in the sand. Up close, Ilara could see the lines on his face, the scars that spoke of a life lived in harsh conditions. He didn't look like a monster from the stories. He looked tired, weathered, perhaps even kind. Leon carefully extended the canteen again, his eyes fixed on the twins. "They need water," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. Alara hesitated for one more moment and then took the canteen with a trembling hand. She drank a small sip first. It was cool and clean, unlike anything she had tasted before. Then she carefully tipped a few drops into each of her brothers' mouths. They stirred, their cries subsiding as the precious liquid revived them. Leon watched this with a furrowed brow, then stood and scanned the horizon. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. "Where are your parents?" and he asked, though the words meant nothing to Alara. He mimed adults, then looked around questioningly. Alara understood the gesture. She shook her head and pointed back toward the distant shimmer that was her village, then made a pushing motion with her hand. Leon's expression darkened. "They sent you away? Out here, with babies?" The anger in his voice made Alara flinch, but somehow she knew it wasn't directed at her. Leon saw her reaction and softened his tone, offering what she recognized as a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He pointed to his vehicle, then to her and the twins, and mimed driving away. Alara hesitated. To trust this stranger, this alien, went against everything she had been taught. But to stay here meant certain death for her brothers. And something in those green eyes told her that whatever dangers might lie ahead with this human, they couldn't be worse than what awaited them in the desert. Slowly she nodded. Leon's smile widened, and he reached out cautiously. When she didn't back away, he carefully lifted her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed from weakness. Then with gentle movements, he guided her toward the vehicle. As they approached, Alara saw that it was larger than she had first thought. The words Terra Explorer were painted on its side in faded letters. Leon opened a door and helped her climb inside, into a space filled with equipment, supplies, and what looked like living quarters. The inside was blessedly cool, and Alara nearly wept with relief as the temperature drop soothed her burning skin. Leon quickly retrieved a container from a small cooling unit and poured a clear liquid into a cup, offering it to her. Alara sniffed it cautiously. It wasn't water, it had a sweet scent that reminded her of the healing nectar her mother used to give her when she was ill. With the twins secure in her lap, she took a small sip. It was sweet and soothing, coating her parched throat. Leon nodded approvingly, then moved to the front of the vehicle and sat before a complex array of controls. The engine rumbled to life, and they began to move across the sand, much faster than Alara could have walked. As they traveled, Leon kept glancing back at her and the twins, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, anger perhaps, or determination. Alara didn't know what to make of this strange human who had appeared like a mirage in the desert, but for now she was simply grateful not to be dying under the Almara's sun. Little did she know that this chance encounter would set in motion events that would change not only her life, but the very fabric of relations between their species on this distant world. Leon Harris had not planned to get involved in local affairs when he'd landed on Almaris 3 months ago. He was a surveyor, mapping resources for potential Earth colonies, always moving, never staying long enough to form attachments. 15 years of wandering the galaxy had taught him that attachments were dangerous. They made you vulnerable, gave you something to lose. But the sight of a child, blue-skinned or not, abandoned in the desert with 2 infants, had awakened something in him that he thought long dead. As he drove back toward the nearest settlement, a trading post called Corrix, he kept glancing in the rearview mirror at his unexpected passengers. The girl, she couldn't be more than 9 or 10 by human standards, had finally fallen asleep, her body curled protectively around the twins. Their blue skin had a healthier sheen now that they were out of the direct sun and hydrated, but Leon could see they needed medical attention. The smaller one especially had a concerning rattle to his breathing. He tapped the communication panel on his dashboard. "Mara, give me a biological readout on my passengers." The vehicle's AI responded with a soft beep, and a holographic display appeared, showing 3 life signs. The juvenile Almarian female shows signs of dehydration and minor radiation burns from sun exposure. The infant males are suffering from respiratory distress and elevated body temperatures consistent with the seasonal Krell virus affecting this region. Medical attention is recommended within 12 hours. Leon's jaw tightened. Krell virus. He'd heard about the outbreak in the trading post, but hadn't realized it had spread to the Almerian villages. It wasn't usually fatal to adults, but infants. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The trading post had a medical facility, not state-of-the-art, but adequate. Dr. Sarah Miller ran it, an old friend from his Earth days. She'd help without asking too many questions. But as the Terra Explorer crested a dune, Leon spotted something that made his blood run cold. A patrol vessel bearing the insignia of the Almerian Security Force was parked outside a small cluster of buildings, a border checkpoint he usually avoided by taking the longer route through the canyons. He couldn't risk it. If these children had been abandoned, there was a reason, and the Almerians were notorious for their strict tribal laws. Outsiders interfering in family matters could face severe penalties. Leon changed course, veering sharply to the west, toward the maze-like canyon system known as the Serpent's Spine. It would add hours to their journey, but it was safer than trying to explain 3 Almerian children in his vehicle to border guards. The sudden change in direction roused his passenger. The girl sat up, her large, pupil-less silver eyes blinking at him in confusion. "It's okay," Leon said, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone would reassure her. "We're taking a detour." He pointed to the patrol vessel, now visible on a ridge behind them, and made a cutting motion across his throat, the universal sign for danger. The girl's eyes widened. She glanced at the patrol vessel, then back at Leon, and nodded with a gravity beyond her years. Whatever had happened to her, she understood the concept of authorities being a threat. They drove in silence for nearly an hour, the Terra Explorer handling the increasingly rough terrain with practiced ease. Leon had modified the vehicle himself, adding reinforced suspension and a plasma shield generator that could deflect most projectile weapons. He'd never expected to use those modifications to protect a group of alien children, but he was grateful for them now. As they entered the canyon system, the temperature dropped noticeably. Massive rock formations towered on either side, casting long shadows across their path. It was beautiful in a stark, primal way. Red stone carved by millennia of wind and rare flash floods into fantastic shapes. Leon noticed the girl staring out the window in apparent awe. Perhaps she had never seen this part of her world before. "The Serpent's Spine," he said, pointing to the canyon. "Serpent's Spine." The girl looked at him, then pointed to the canyon and repeated, "Serpent's Spine," her pronunciation surprisingly good. Leon smiled. "Quick learner." He tapped his chest. "Leon." She hesitated, then tapped her own chest. "Alara." "Alara," he repeated. "And them?" He gestured to the twins. Alara looked down at the babies, a shadow crossing her face. She touched the larger one. "Maro." Then the smaller one, the sicker of the two. "Kel." "Maro and Kel," Leon said. "We're going to help them, Alara. I promise." Though she couldn't understand his words, something in his tone must have conveyed his meaning, because Ilara's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she gave him a small nod. They continued deeper into the canyon system, the path narrowing until the walls of stone were close enough to touch on either side. Leon navigated by memory and the Terra Explorer's advanced mapping system. Few people came this way, too dangerous, too easy to get lost in the labyrinthine passages. But that was exactly why Leon had memorized the route years ago. Sometimes the most dangerous path was the safest. Just as the sun was beginning to set, casting the canyon in deep purple shadows, they emerged into a hidden valley. Nestled against the far rock wall was a small structure, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. It was an abandoned research outpost, used briefly by Earth scientists before diplomatic tensions had forced them to withdraw from this region. Leon brought the vehicle to a stop and powered down the engine. "Home sweet home," he muttered, "at least for tonight." Alara was staring at the structure with apprehension. Leon pointed to it and gave a thumbs up, then pointed to the babies and mimed sleeping. He needed her to trust him, to understand they were safe here. After a moment, Alara nodded. Leon smiled and exited the vehicle, coming around to help her down with the twins. The air in the valley was cool, but not cold, a blessed relief after the day's heat. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the deep purple sky. Leon approached the outpost and pressed his palm against a hidden scanner beside the door. After a moment's hesitation, the door slid open with a hiss of escaping air. The interior was dark and dusty, but as they entered, motion sensors activated soft lighting. It was a simple space, one large room with basic furniture covered in protective sheets, a small kitchen area, and a separate space that had once been a laboratory but could serve as sleeping quarters. The air was stale, but breathable. Leon quickly moved to the environmental controls, activating the air filtration system and adjusting the temperature to something comfortable for Almarians, who preferred slightly warmer conditions than humans. Ilara stood in the center of the room, clutching her brothers, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. "It's not much," Leon said, pulling sheets off the furniture to reveal a worn sofa and several chairs. "But it's safe. No one knows about this place except me." He approached a cabinet on the far wall and unlocked it with another palm scan, revealing medical supplies. He selected several items and turned to Ilara, moving slowly to avoid frightening her. "For the babies," he said, holding up a small handheld device. "Medicine. Help them." Ilara's grip on her brothers tightened, but after a moment of consideration, she nodded and carefully placed them on the now uncovered sofa. The twins squirmed, their tiny hands reaching for each other even in their weakened state. Leon knelt beside them and activated the medical scanner, running it slowly over their small bodies. The device beeped and a holographic display appeared, showing information he couldn't fully understand. Almarian physiology was similar to human in some ways, but very different in others. "Mara," he called to his AI, "translate the medical data and recommend treatment." The AI's voice emanated from a small communicator on his wrist. "Translation complete. Both subjects are suffering from Krell virus, as suspected. The smaller subject, identified as Kell, has developed a secondary bacterial infection in the lungs. Recommended treatment: 5 cc of broad-spectrum antibiotic XR7 for Kell and viral inhibitor TB12 for both subjects. Warning: medications will need to be adjusted for Almarian physiology." Leon nodded and retrieved the medications from the cabinet, carefully measuring reduced doses based on the AI's calculations. Ilara watched his every move, her silver eyes narrow with suspicion, but also desperate hope. When he approached with the medicine, she held up a hand, stopping him. Then to his surprise, she pointed to herself, then the medicine, then her mouth. She wanted him to demonstrate that it was safe by taking it himself. Leon smiled. Smart kid, but he shook his head and pointed to the scanner, then to the holographic display showing the differences between human and Almarian biology. He pointed to himself, then made an X with his fingers, then pointed to the medicine. Ilara frowned, clearly trying to understand. Leon thought for a moment, then took a different approach. He retrieved a small vial of water from his pack, drank some himself, then offered it to her. Then he pointed to the medicine, to the babies, and gave a thumbs up. The analogy seemed to work. After a moment of hesitation, Ilara nodded and gently lifted Kell, the smaller twin, into a more upright position. Leon carefully administered the medication, and Ilara did the same for Maro. "Good," Leon said, giving her an encouraging smile. "Now we wait. They'll start feeling better soon." As if to confirm his words, both twins seemed to relax slightly, their breathing becoming less labored. Ilara stroked their heads, murmuring soft words in her native language. Leon moved away to give her some privacy and began preparing a simple meal from his supplies. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder what had led to this situation. What kind of people would send a child and 2 infants into the desert to die? And what would happen when those people discovered their intended victims had survived? One thing was certain: he was involved now, whether he liked it or not. And Leon Harris was not a man who left a job half-finished, especially when innocent lives were at stake. The Almaris night was unusually cool, the wind howling through the canyon with an eerie, whistling sound that reminded Leon of the storms on Earth's open seas. He sat by the outpost's single window, keeping watch while Ilara and the twins slept on the sofa he had converted into a makeshift bed. The girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion after checking on her brothers countless times. Even in sleep, one blue hand remained outstretched, touching Maro's tiny foot as if to reassure herself they were still there, still safe. Leon sipped from a mug of synthetic coffee, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The twins were responding well to the medication, their fever had broken, and the rasping sound in Kell's breathing had diminished. By morning they should be strong enough to travel. But where would they go? He couldn't simply drop them off at the nearest settlement. Whoever had sent them into the desert would be looking for them, or more likely, waiting for confirmation of their deaths. And if he, an off-worlder, was found with Almerian children, the consequences could be severe. Kidnapping charges at best, execution at worst. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound. Ilara was awake, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light as she watched him from across the room. "Can't sleep?" Leon asked softly, knowing she wouldn't understand the words but hoping the tone would convey his meaning. To his surprise, Ilara slipped from the makeshift bed and approached him, moving with the silent grace that all Almerians seemed to possess. She stopped a few feet away, studying him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. Then she raised her hand in an unmistakable gesture. She wanted to speak with him. Leon had heard that Almerians possessed a limited form of touch telepathy, a biological trait evolved on their harsh world that allowed them to share basic concepts and emotions through skin contact. This ability, stronger in children than adults, had helped their species survive by allowing quick communication in dangerous situations. He had never experienced it himself, as most Almerians avoided physical contact with off-worlders. After a moment's hesitation, Leon nodded and extended his hand, palm up. Ilara placed her small blue hand on his. The sensation was immediate and unlike anything he had experienced before. Not words exactly, but concepts and emotions flowing into his mind with startling clarity. Gratitude, fear, confusion, a desperate need to protect her brothers, and questions. So many questions about him, about why he had helped them, about what would happen next. Leon tried to project reassurance back to her, focusing on his determination to keep them safe. He wasn't sure if the communication worked both ways for humans, but he had to try. When Ilara finally withdrew her hand, she looked at him with new understanding. She pointed to the twins, then outside, then made a cutting motion across her throat, the same gesture he had used earlier to indicate danger. "Someone wants to hurt them?" Leon asked, though he already knew the answer. Ilara nodded, then pointed to herself and made the same gesture. "You too. They want all of you dead." Another nod. Then Ilara did something unexpected. She reached into a small pouch attached to the simple garment she wore and pulled out a flat, circular object. It appeared to be made of a polished blue stone with intricate symbols carved into its surface. She held it out to Leon, her expression solemn. Leon carefully took the object, turning it over in his hands. It was warm to the touch, almost as if it contained its own heat source. The symbols were unlike any Almerian writing he had seen before. Older perhaps, more primal. Ilara touched the object, then pointed to the twins, then to herself. She made a circular motion with her finger, encompassing all three of them. "It's connected to you? To your family?" She nodded, then pointed to the object again and made a motion like hiding it. "You want me to keep it safe?" Another nod, more emphatic this time. Leon considered the object with newfound seriousness. Whatever it was clearly important. Perhaps even the reason the children had been sent to die in the desert. He carefully tucked it into an inner pocket of his jacket. "I'll keep it safe," he promised, "and you and your brothers too." Though she couldn't understand his words, Ilara seemed to sense his commitment. She gave him a small, solemn nod, then returned to the makeshift bed and her sleeping brothers. Leon turned back to the window, his mind now filled with even more questions. What was this object? Why was it so important? And what kind of danger had he invited by helping these children? Morning would bring answers, he hoped, but it would also bring decisions that could not be undone. For now, all he could do was watch and wait as the three moons of Almaris cast their pale light over the hidden valley. Dawn broke over the canyon with an explosion of color, deep reds and oranges that painted the stone walls with fire. Leon had dozed off in his chair, waking with a start as the first rays of sunlight touched his face. He immediately checked on his charges. Ilara was already awake, carefully feeding the twins with a nutrient solution Leon had prepared the night before. The babies looked significantly better. Their blue skin had regained its healthy luster, and they were more active, tiny hands grasping at Ilara's fingers as she fed them. "Good morning," Leon said, stretching to work out the kinks in his back. Sleeping in a chair had not been kind to his aging body. Ilara looked up and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. She pointed to the twins and gave him a thumbs up, a gesture she had clearly learned from him. Leon smiled. Good, they're feeling better. He moved to the small kitchen area and began preparing a simple breakfast from his supplies. As he worked, he kept glancing at his vehicle's communication system, debating whether to risk contacting Dr. Miller at the trading post. He needed more information about the situation, and she was the only person on this planet he trusted. Finally, he made his decision. He activated the system, but set it to the most secure channel, one that would be difficult for local authorities to intercept. After a few moments of static, a woman's face appeared on the small screen. Dr. Eliza Miller looked tired, her normally neat black hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. Leon Harris, she said, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. I was beginning to think you'd left the planet without saying goodbye. Not my style, Eliza, you know that. Leon kept his voice low, though Alara was watching him with obvious interest. I need information, and I need it fast. Dr. Miller Hen's expression turned serious. What kind of information? There's a situation involving an Almerian child and 2 infants. They were abandoned in the Crimson Desert yesterday. I found them and intervened. Dr. Miller's eyes widened. Please tell me you didn't bring alien children to the trading post. The authorities are all over the place right now, Leon. There's some kind of high-priority search going on. Leon's stomach tightened. For 3 missing Almerian children by any chance? I don't know the details, but the official story is that an off-worlder kidnapped them from their village. There's a substantial reward for information leading to their recovery. She leaned closer to the screen, lowering her voice. Leon, what have you gotten yourself into? The truth, Eliza, I found them dying in the desert. Someone wanted them dead, and now they're trying to cover it up by painting me as a kidnapper. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. I need to know who's behind this and why. Dr. Miller was silent for a moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can find out. But Leon, you need to be careful. If they catch you with those children, I know the penalty for kidnapping on this world. Leon's voice was grim. Just get me whatever information you can. I'll contact you again in 6 hours. After ending the communication, Leon turned to find Alara standing directly behind him, the twins cradled in her arms. She had obviously been listening, though she couldn't have understood the exchange. We need to move, Leon said, gesturing to the vehicle. Not safe here anymore. Alara nodded, already moving to gather the few supplies they had used overnight. Her efficiency was impressive for one so young. Clearly, she had learned early to be self-sufficient. Within 20 minutes, they were back in the Terra Explorer, heading deeper into the canyon system. Leon had decided to avoid settlements entirely for now, making for an old mining camp he knew of on the far side of the mountains. It was long abandoned, but the basic infrastructure remained, including a communication array more powerful than the one in his vehicle. As they drove, Leon tried to piece together what little information he had. The object Alara had given him weighed heavily in his pocket. He had examined it more closely while she slept and found that the symbols seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, revealing new patterns. It was clearly more than a simple family heirloom. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they ventured into areas rarely traversed by vehicles. The Terra Explorer handled it well, but their progress was slow. By midday, they had only covered about half the distance to the mining camp. Leon decided to stop in a sheltered alcove to rest and check on the twins. As he powered down the engine, he noticed Alara staring intently at something through the windshield. Following her gaze, he spotted a dust cloud on the horizon, moving fast and headed in their direction. Patrol craft, he muttered, reaching for his binoculars. Through the powerful lenses, he could make out the sleek silver shape of an Almerian security vessel. It was still far off, but its trajectory would bring it directly over their position in less than 20 minutes. Leon turned to Alara, who was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. She had already guessed the nature of the threat. We need to hide, he said, pointing to the dust cloud, then to the Terra Explorer, then making a covering motion with his hands. Alara nodded quickly and began helping him gather branches and loose rocks to camouflage the vehicle. They worked in silent efficiency, and within minutes, the Terra Explorer was hidden as well as possible given the circumstances. But it wasn't enough. The patrol craft was equipped with advanced scanning technology that would easily detect the vehicle's metal signature, regardless of visual camouflage. Leon made a quick decision. "Stay here," he told Alara, pointing emphatically to the vehicle, then to her and the twins. "Stay, hide." He grabbed his pack and a small handheld device from the dashboard, then slipped out of the vehicle, securing the door behind him. The device in his hand was a signal generator, a tool he used for mapping terrain, but it could also be repurposed to create a false electronic signature, mimicking the Terra Explorer's unique energy pattern. Sprinting across the rocky ground, Leon headed for a narrow ravine about half a kilometer away. If his plan worked, the patrol would follow the false signal, giving Alara and the twins a chance to remain hidden. He reached the ravine just as the patrol craft appeared over the nearest ridge. Ducking down behind a large boulder, Leon activated the signal generator and set it to maximum output. Then he began to climb, moving as quickly and quietly as possible up the steep wall of the ravine. From his new vantage point, he could see the patrol craft hovering near his position, its scanning beams sweeping the area. There were two Almerians visible in the open cockpit, both wearing the distinctive red uniforms of the security force. The craft circled the ravine twice, then began to descend. Leon pressed himself against the rock face, hardly daring to breathe. If they found him, the game was over. But just as the craft was about to land, another vessel appeared in the sky, larger, more heavily armed, bearing the insignia of the Almerian High Council. A voice boomed from it, speaking in the Almerian language. The patrol craft immediately changed course, ascending rapidly to join the larger vessel. After a brief communication that Leon couldn't hear, both craft turned and headed away, back toward the distant settlements. Leon waited until they were completely out of sight before descending from his hiding place. He retrieved the signal generator and made his way back to the Terra Explorer, moving cautiously in case the retreat had been a ruse. When he reached the vehicle, he found Alara huddled in the back, a crude knife fashioned from a piece of metal clutched in her hand. The twins were hidden beneath a pile of supplies, only their small faces visible. "It's okay," Leon said softly, holding up his hands to show he was unarmed. "They're gone." Alara lowered the knife but didn't relinquish it. Her expression was a mixture of relief and determination that Leon found both impressive and heartbreaking in one so young. She had been prepared to fight to protect her brothers, even against overwhelming odds. Leon started the engine and they continued their journey, now moving with even greater caution. The encounter had been too close, and Leon knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. They needed a more permanent solution, a way to clear his name and ensure the children's safety. As the Terra Explorer navigated the treacherous mountain paths, Leon's mind raced with possibilities. The involvement of the High Council was troubling. It suggested that whoever wanted these children dead had considerable influence. But it also meant that the stakes were higher than he had initially thought. The object Alara had entrusted to him must be truly significant. By nightfall, they had reached the abandoned mining camp. It was a ghostly place, a collection of prefabricated buildings clinging to the mountainside, long since stripped of anything valuable. But the communication array still stood on the highest point, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Leon parked the Terra Explorer in what had once been a storage bay, concealing it from aerial view. He helped Alara and the twins into the main building, which had once served as the administration center. The interior was dusty but intact, protected from the worst of the elements by its sturdy construction. "Home for now," Leon said, setting down his pack and beginning to establish a temporary camp. He activated chemical light sticks, casting the room in a soft blue glow that seemed to comfort Alara and the twins. While Alara fed the babies, Leon climbed to the roof to examine the communication array. It was old but serviceable. With a few hours of work, he could have it operational again, powerful enough to send a message directly to Earth if necessary. But as he stood there looking out over the vast Almerian landscape, Leon realized that he had no one to call for help. He had spent too many years as a loner, burning bridges, avoiding attachments. The only person on this planet who might help was Dr. Miller, and involving her further could put her life at risk. No, this was his problem to solve. He had made the choice to help these children, and now he had to see it through, whatever the cost. As Leon descended from the roof, he found Alara waiting for him at the bottom of the ladder. The twins were asleep on a makeshift bed nearby. She gestured for him to sit beside her on a crate, her expression serious. Once again, she extended her hand, offering the touch telepathy that had allowed them to communicate before. Leon hesitated only briefly before accepting. This time, the connection was stronger, the concepts and emotions more complex. Ilara showed him her home, a modest dwelling on the outskirts of a village. She showed him her parents, tall, dignified Almerians with the same silver eyes as their daughter. And she showed him their deaths, a spacecraft accident that had seemed random, but now appeared suspicious in her memory. She showed him being taken in by her uncle and aunt, who had treated her and the twins with cold disdain. She showed him discovering the bluestone disk hidden among her parents' few remaining possessions, and her uncle's rage when he found her with it. Then came the accusation of theft, a mere pretense, Leon now understood, and the cruel expulsion into the desert, a death sentence disguised as punishment for a minor offense. When the connection broke, Leon sat in silence, processing what he had learned. Ilara watched him, her young face grave with the weight of her experiences. Your parents were murdered, Leon said finally, knowing she couldn't understand the words but needing to say them aloud. And your uncle wanted that disc badly enough to kill 3 children for it. Ilara nodded as if she had understood perfectly. Perhaps the telepathic connection worked both ways after all. Leon took the disc from his pocket and examined it again. What could make it worth 3 innocent lives? The symbols seemed to pulse in the dim light, almost as if responding to his thoughts. Whatever this is, he said, meeting Ilara's gaze, we're going to use it to make things right. I promise you that. Ilara's expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed slightly, as if a burden had been shared and lessened. She returned to the twins, checking on them one last time before curling up beside them to sleep. Leon remained awake, turning the disc over and over in his hands, searching for answers in its mysterious symbols. Outside, the wind howled through the abandoned camp, carrying with it the distant sounds of a world that had suddenly become much more dangerous for all of them. The next 3 days fell into a pattern of careful movement and watchful waiting. Leon worked on repairing the communication array while Ilara cared for the twins, who were growing stronger by the day. They developed a rudimentary system of communication, a mixture of gestures, drawings, and occasional touch telepathy when more complex ideas needed to be shared. Leon learned that Ilara's father had been a scientist, studying ancient Almerian artifacts. The disc had been his most significant discovery, found in ruins far older than any known Almerian civilization. He had kept it secret even from his colleagues, sharing his findings only with his life partner and a few trusted friends. Through their limited communication, Leon pieced together a disturbing picture. Ilara's uncle, Drax, was not just a cruel relative, but a high-ranking member of a political faction that sought to preserve Almerian purity by limiting contact with offworlders. He had opposed Ilara's father's research, seeing it as a threat to their traditional understanding of Almerian history. On the 4th day, Leon finally succeeded in repairing the communication array. He used it to contact Dr. Miller, keeping the transmission brief to avoid detection. Leon, Dr. Sarah Miller's voice crackled through the static. You're in serious trouble. The story has changed. Now they're saying you're working with a radical group, using the children as leverage for political demands. That's absurd, Leon growled. Have you found out anything useful? Yes, but you won't like it. The uncle, Drax, he's the one pushing this narrative. He's Deputy Minister of Security for the whole southern continent, and he's mobilized every available patrol to find you. Leon's heart sank. This was worse than he had imagined. What about the parents? Have you found anything about their deaths? Official record says spacecraft malfunction, but I managed to access the original investigation files. There were inconsistencies, signs of tampering that were overlooked or deliberately ignored. The investigator who raised concerns was reassigned to the polar outpost 2 days later. Dr. Miller paused. Leon, this goes deep. Whatever you're involved in, it's bigger than just a family dispute. I know, Leon said grimly. The girl's father found something, Eliza. Something important enough to kill for. You need to turn yourself in, Leon. Bring the children to the trading post. I'll arrange for neutral observers to be present. Make sure they are treated fairly. Leon considered it. It seemed like the most logical course of action. He couldn't keep running forever, and the children deserved stability and proper care. But something held him back. a nagging doubt, a feeling that there was more to this situation than even Dr. Miller realized. I need more time, he said finally. There's something I need to understand first. Dr. Miller sighed. I can buy you maybe 48 hours. After that, I won't be able to help you anymore. They're starting to ask questions about my connection to you. 48 hours is all I need. Thank you, Eliza. After ending the transmission, Leon returned to the main building to find Alara playing with the twins. She had constructed a simple toy from spare parts, a colorful mobile that hung above them, capturing their attention. It was a moment of normalcy amid the chaos of their situation, and it strengthened Leon's resolve to find a solution. That night, as the twins slept, Leon studied the disc again. He had been approaching it as an archaeologist might, trying to decipher the symbols, looking for patterns. But perhaps there was another way. He held out the disc to Alara. Can you show me? He asked, tapping his temple to indicate mental communication. Show me what it does. Alara took the disc and placed it on the floor between them. Then she took Leon's hand and placed it on the disc alongside her own. The touch telepathy began immediately, but this time it was different, more vivid, more directed. Alara showed him her father's discovery, not just the disc itself, but what it contained. It was a record, a history of the Almarians that contradicted everything they had been taught. It showed that they were not native to this world, but had come from elsewhere, fleeing some great catastrophe, and they had not come alone. The images were fragmented, incomplete, but Leon understood enough. The Almarians and humans had once lived together, perhaps even originated from the same world. The disc contained genetic data, star maps, migration patterns, evidence that would shatter the foundation of Almarian society, particularly the isolationist factions that currently held power. When the connection ended, Leon sat back, stunned by the implications. This would change everything, he murmured. The whole relationship between our species. Alara nodded solemnly. She might not understand his words, but she understood the importance of what they shared. Leon's mind raced with the possibilities. This wasn't just about 3 children anymore. It was about historical truth in the future of 2 species. The disc needed to be presented to both Almarian and human authorities, but in a way that couldn't be suppressed or dismissed. He needed proof beyond the disc itself, something that would force both sides to acknowledge the truth. And he needed to ensure Alara and the twins would be protected once the truth was revealed. As dawn approached, Leon finalized his plan. It was risky, perhaps even foolhardy, but it was the only way he could see to resolve the situation. He would need Dr. Miller's help one more time, and he would need to trust that there were still people of integrity within the Almarian government. Most of all, he would need courage, not the physical bravery he had relied on throughout his solitary career, but the moral courage to stand for truth even when it was dangerous. As the first light of the Almaris sun filtered through the dusty windows of the abandoned building, Leon looked at the sleeping children he had somehow become responsible for. Whatever happened next, he would not abandon them. He had spent too many years running from connections, from responsibility. Perhaps it was time to stop running. With renewed determination, Leon began preparing for their journey, one that would take them not away from civilization, but directly into its heart. The capital city of Almaris Surani was a marvel of alien architecture, soaring spires of blue crystal and white stone that seemed to defy gravity, connected by delicate bridges that spanned impossible distances. Leon had visited once before, years ago, but had never ventured into the governmental district, the heart of Almarian power. Now he stood before the imposing entrance to the Hall of Assembly, the Terra Explorer parked conspicuously in the public square outside. Beside him, Alara clutched the twins, her young face set in an expression of determination that mirrored his own. They had arrived in the city under cover of darkness, using the service tunnels that Dr. Miller had described. The doctor had done more than just provide information. She had contacted trusted colleagues in both human and Almarian scientific communities, people who would recognize the significance of the disc and stand as witnesses to its revelation. Now, as the morning light illuminated the crystal towers of the city, those allies were gathering inside the Hall of Assembly, where the High Council was in session. All that remained was for Leon and Alara to make their entrance, a public, undeniable appearance that couldn't be hushed up or denied. "Are you ready?" Leon asked Alara, knowing she couldn't understand the words but trusting she would understand his meaning. Alara gave a single, solemn nod. Over the past days, she had grown not just in confidence but in presence. Despite her youth, there was something regal in her bearing, a dignity that reminded Leon of how she had described her parents. Together, they ascended the broad steps to the entrance. As expected, they were immediately confronted by security personnel, tall Almerians in formal uniforms who moved to block their path. "I am Leon Harris," he announced in a clear, carrying voice. "I seek audience with the High Council on a matter of grave importance to both our peoples." One of the guards spoke rapidly into a communication device, while others moved to surround them, hands on weapons. Leon remained calm, making no threatening movements. He had left his own weapons behind. This was to be a confrontation of truth, not force. After a tense moment, a response came through the guard's device. The guard's expression changed from suspicion to surprise, then reluctant acceptance. He gestured for them to follow, leading them into the vast atrium of the hall. Inside, the space was even more impressive, a soaring dome of crystal that captured and refracted the sunlight, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the polished floor. Almerians moved purposefully through the space, many stopping to stare at the unusual sight of a human, accompanied by an Almerian child and two infants. They were led to a smaller chamber, where several figures waited. Among them, Leon recognized Dr. Miller, looking tense but resolute. Beside her stood two Almerians in the formal robes of the Scientific Academy, allies she had recruited to their cause. "Leon," Dr. Miller said, stepping forward, "you made it. We don't have much time. The council session begins in 10 minutes, and Drax is already inside, pushing for a formal condemnation of human interference in Almerian affairs." "Then we'll have to move quickly," Leon replied. He turned to Alara, kneeling to meet her at eye level. Through gestures and expressions, he conveyed their plan. They would enter the council chamber together, present the disc, and tell their story. Alara nodded, then did something unexpected. She shifted the twins to one arm and reached out with her free hand, touching Leon's forehead in a formal Almerian gesture he recognized as a blessing or affirmation. The touch carried no telepathic message this time, but its meaning was clear. She trusted him to speak for her, to represent her truth. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of more guards, these wearing the distinctive insignia of the High Council itself. Their leader, an elderly Almerian with elaborate facial markings denoting high rank, addressed them in heavily accented human language. "The council will hear you," he said. "But be warned, false accusations against a council member are punishable by the severest penalties." Leon nodded. "We understand. We bring only truth and evidence to support it." The guard led them through ornate doors into the council chamber itself, a circular room with tiered seating, where dozens of Almerians in formal attire sat in concentric rings around a central speaking platform. At the highest tier, 5 Almerians sat on elevated chairs, their robes more elaborate than the others. The High Council itself. As Leon and Alara entered, a hush fell over the assembly. All eyes turned to them, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Among the hostile faces, Leon immediately recognized one, a tall, powerfully built Almerian with cold silver eyes that were eerily similar to Alara's. Drax, the uncle who had sentenced 3 children to die in the desert. Drax rose to his feet, pointing accusingly. "This is the kidnapper," he declared in perfect human language. "The criminal who stole my sister's children. Guards, seize him." Several guards moved forward, but they were halted by a raised hand from the central figure of the High Council, an elderly female Almerian whose face was marked with intricate patterns that spoke of the highest authority. "We will have order," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "The human has been granted audience, and the ancient laws of hospitality apply. He will speak, and then judgment will be rendered." Drax sat down, his face tight with barely controlled rage. Leon led Alara to the central platform, conscious of the hundreds of eyes following their every move. The twins, perhaps sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet in Alara's arms. Leon took a deep breath and began to speak. "Honorable Council, I come before you not as a kidnapper, but as someone who could not stand by and watched 3 innocent children die in the desert. He recounted the events as they had occurred, finding Alara and the twins abandoned, learning of the false accusations against him, discovering the truth about the disc and its significance. As he spoke, Dr. Miller and her Almerian colleagues distributed data tablets to the council members, containing preliminary analyses of the disc's contents. Throughout his testimony, Leon was aware of Alara standing beside him, her posture straight and dignified despite her youth. When he finished speaking, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. This child and her brothers were condemned to die because they were the last obstacles to Drax's possession of the disc. Their parents were murdered for the same reason. I asked the council to examine the evidence and judge accordingly. A murmur ran through the assembly. The High Counselor raised her hand again, and silence fell. "These are grave accusations," she said. "Deputy Minister Drax, you may respond." Drax strode to the platform, his movements controlled but radiating fury. "This is absurd," he began. "A fabrication by an off-worlder who seeks to create discord among our people. The disc is a known forgery created by radical elements who wish to undermine our society. As for the children, they were never abandoned. They were being transported to a health facility when this human interfered, misunderstanding our customs and abducting them in a misguided attempt at heroism." He turned to face the assembly. "I call for the immediate arrest of Leon Harris, the return of my sister's children to my care, and a formal protest to the human authorities for this outrageous interference in Almerian affairs." The council chamber erupted in a babble of voices as various members spoke at once. The High Counselor allowed it to continue for a moment, then raised both hands for silence. "The council will deliberate," she announced. "Until then, the human and the children will remain under council protection." As guards moved to escort them from the chamber, Leon caught sight of Dr. Miller's face. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. They had done all they could. Now it was up to the council to decide where truth lay. They were taken to a small but comfortable room adjacent to the chamber, provided with food and water, and left under guard. Hours passed, during which Leon tried to keep Alara and the twins calm, though his own anxiety was mounting. The stakes were impossibly high. Not just their lives, but the future relationship between their species hung in the balance. It was near sunset when the door finally opened. The High Counselor herself entered, accompanied by only 2 guards. Her expression was unreadable as she regarded Leon and the children. "The council has reached a decision," as she said. "We have examined the disc and the evidence presented by your scientific colleagues. The data is compelling but not conclusive." Leon's heart sank. They had come so far, risked so much. "However," the High Counselor continued, "we have also conducted a separate investigation into the deaths of the children's parents. That investigation has uncovered evidence that supports your allegations against Deputy Minister Drax." She paused, then explained, "When you presented your case, several council members recognized inconsistencies in Drax's earlier testimonies about the spacecraft accident. We obtained access to sealed security recordings from the spaceport that day. The footage clearly shows Drax tampering with the vessel before departure. Additionally, 3 witnesses have come forward, emboldened by your actions, to testify about threats Drax made against his brother-in-law regarding the disc." She approached Alara, who stood straight and proud, the twins now sleeping peacefully in a makeshift bed nearby. "Child of my people," the High Counselor said in her own language, which Leon understood just enough to follow. "You have shown courage beyond your years. The council acknowledges the wrong done to you and your brothers and pledges to make it right." Turning back to Leon, she switched to human language. "Drax has been taken into custody. He will face judgment for his crimes. The children will be placed with a guardian of good character from their own family line, a cousin of their mother who has already expressed willingness to take them in." Relief washed over Leon, so powerful that for a moment he couldn't speak. When he found his voice again, he asked, "And the disc? The truth it contains?" The High Counselor's expression softened slightly. "The truth is rarely simple, Leon Harris. The disc will be studied by a joint team of Almerian and human scientists. If its contents prove authentic, it will indeed change many things about our understanding of our past. But such changes must come carefully, thoughtfully, not in a sudden revelation that might destabilize our society. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Not all truths are ready to be told, even when they are known. But this truth, it will not be buried again. You have my word on that. Leon nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution. Revolutionary change, even when necessary, needed to be managed carefully to avoid chaos and backlash. What happens now, he asked. You will be formally cleared of all charges. The children will remain here in the capital under council protection until arrangements are finalized with their new guardian. The High Counselor paused. You have earned the gratitude of the council, Leon Harris, and you have earned the right to visit these children should you wish to maintain a connection with them. The implication was clear. He was free to go, to return to his solitary life of wandering the stars. The children would be safe, their future secure. His involvement could end here, his conscience clear. But as Leon looked at Alara, who was watching this exchange with solemn attention, he knew that walking away wasn't an option he could live with. These children, this brave, remarkable girl, had changed something fundamental within him. The connections he had spent years avoiding had found him anyway, and he was no longer certain he wanted to escape them. I would like to stay, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice, at least until they're settled, if that's acceptable. The High Counselor inclined her head. It is acceptable, and perhaps wise. After she departed, Leon sat beside Alara on the floor. The twins were beginning to stir, making the soft chirping sounds that Leon had learned indicated hunger. Alara tended to them with practiced efficiency, but her eyes kept returning to Leon's face, questioning. He tried to explain what had happened, using gestures and simple words. Drax was gone. They were safe. They would have a new home, with family who would care for them properly. Alara listened, then placed her hand on his. The touch telepathy was becoming more natural, more nuanced with practice. She conveyed understanding, relief, gratitude, but also a question, an anxiety about the future. I'm not leaving, Leon said, putting as much reassurance into his thoughts as he could. Not yet, not until you're ready. The tension in Alara's small shoulders eased. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed her solemn face into that of the child she truly was, despite all she had endured. Outside the windows of their temporary quarters, the large moon of Almaras rose over the crystal spires of the capital, its light creating a tapestry of shadow and illumination. It was beautiful, Leon thought. This world that had seemed so alien, so hostile when he had first arrived, now held something he had not expected to find. A sense of purpose, of connection. The disc had revealed that humans and Almarians shared a deeper history than either had known. But it was three blue-skinned children who had revealed to Leon Harris that the barriers he had built around his heart were never as impenetrable as he had believed. 6 months later, Leon stood on the porch of a modest dwelling on the outskirts of the capital, watching as Alara chased the twins through a garden filled with the vibrant purple vegetation native to Almaras. The boys, now sturdy toddlers with an apparently inexhaustible supply of energy, squealed with delight as their sister pretended to be unable to catch them. They grow so quickly, said a voice beside him. Mirai, the cousin who had become the children's guardian, handed Leon a steaming cup of a beverage that resembled tea but tasted of something closer to cinnamon. Too quickly, Leon agreed, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. In the months since the council's decision, much had changed. Drax had been convicted of multiple crimes, including the murder of Alara's parents, and sentenced to permanent exile on the harsh northern continent. The disc was being studied by a team of scientists from both species, its secrets slowly revealing a shared history that would eventually rewrite the understanding of both cultures. Leon had remained on Almaras, initially to ensure the children's transition to their new home went smoothly, then to assist with the scientific teams studying the disc, and finally because he had found, to his surprise, that he no longer wished to leave. He had taken a position as a liaison between the Almarian scientific community and their human counterparts, a role that suited his unique experience with both cultures. It was work that mattered, that contributed to a greater understanding between species that had viewed each other with suspicion for too long. But more important than the work were the connections he had formed. Mirai had welcomed him into her home as a friend and ally in raising the children. Ilara had blossomed under their combined care, her natural intelligence and resilience finding proper nurturing at last. The twins, Maro and Kel, now recognized him as a consistent, caring presence in their lives, greeting his visits with enthusiastic affection. "Will you be joining us for the Moonrise Festival tomorrow?" Mirai asked, her silver eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "It's when our single moon is at its fullest and closest point to our planet. Quite a spectacle." "I wouldn't miss it," Leon replied. It would be his first experience of an Almerian cultural celebration, a step deeper into a world he was still learning to navigate. Their conversation was interrupted by Alara, who came running up to the porch, the twins following at a more unsteady pace. "Leon," she called out in perfect human language, one of many skills she had been eagerly acquiring. "Tell us the story again, about how you found us in the desert." Leon smiled. It had become a favorite request, though he suspected it was more for the twins' benefit than her own. Ilara remembered that day all too clearly, but the boys had been too young to retain their own memories of it. "If you insist," he said, setting down his cup and moving to sit on the steps. The twins immediately clambered into his lap, while Ilara sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder with the easy confidence of a child who knows she is valued and secure. As Leon began the familiar tale, embellishing certain parts for dramatic effect in ways that made Alara roll her eyes good-naturedly, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He had come to Almaris as a solitary surveyor, expecting nothing more than another entry in his log of explored worlds. He would leave, someday, though not soon, as something far different. A friend, a teacher, perhaps even, in some undefined but meaningful way, a parent. The disc had proven that humans and Almerians were connected by ancient history, by shared origins lost to time. But it was these three blue-skinned children who had proven to Leon Harris that the connections that truly mattered were not those forged in the distant past, but those created by choice, by courage, and by love in the present moment. As the story concluded and the twins demanded yet another retelling, Leon caught Alara's eye. She smiled at him, a smile that contained understanding beyond her years. They had saved each other in ways neither could have anticipated on that scorching day in the desert. And in doing so, they had begun to forge a new kind of bond between their peoples, not through grand political gestures or scientific discoveries, but through the simple, profound experience of becoming family across the stars.